This yin yoga practice will include postures such as quarter dog pose, twisted roots pose, caterpillar, and happy baby pose. So some props that might be useful are a couple of pillows, a couple of blankets, maybe a blanket in a blanket roll, and possibly a couple of books to be used as blocks might be useful. The theme for this practice will be the summer solstice. It's very useful to start off a yoga practice with a sense of arrival, maybe create a sense of rootedness and a sense of grounding. So the first thing to do is to just spend a moment and check in with how your body is feeling, check in with how your mind is doing, and check in with your breath. So for this practice, we'll start off in a posture known as thunderbolt pose, and some of us can do this and some of us can't. And a thunderbolt pose is basically just sitting back on your heels. So you basically come to all fours and then sit back like this. Now, for some of us, this is not going to happen. If that's your case, then you need to pick a different seat. For some of us, we get really close, and if we're getting close, then maybe some height will help. So this is where books are handy. So you can take a couple of books, or 3, or 4, or 5, and place them underneath your hips so that they're sitting squarely on your sits bones here. So your heels will have to go wide here. Try that. For some of us, even this doesn't even work. And so if that's the case, maybe come to cross-legged or just sit with your legs out in front. Find your easy pose here. Otherwise, if you can find a version of thunderbolt posed, then we'll stay here for a couple of minutes. So allow yourself to soften and kind of sink and root into your lower body. So you're really feeling that connection that your shins, the tops of your feet, make with the floor. Maybe grow your spine long just for a moment to bring it to a nice neutral position. Shoulders roll up and back so that you have openness in your front body so that you can breathe here. And since the theme of today's practice will be the summer solstice, we'll concentrate on our sun center. So our sun center is our solar plexus. So bring awareness to the height of your torso, the area of your torso right around your navel, your belly button. And then bring your mental visualization there. Now, if it's hard to visualize that place, maybe physically touch it with your hand. So maybe take your left hand, just lay it right over your navel, right hand on top of it, just to help you bring some awareness to the solar plexus, to the third chakra here. And then check in with your breath as you inhale. Maybe physically feel your abdomen expanding on the inhale. You can actually feel your belly button push in towards your hand. And then as you exhale, everything softens and relaxes as you keep that mental visualization here in this area of your torso. If it's helpful, maybe you could visualize a yellow orb of light, like the sun, residing there. Gentle, radiant orb. And as you inhale, it brightens. As you exhale, the colors become more lucid. Just to create a little bit of a breath attention here. And if it's okay with you, maybe lengthen the breath. So lengthen the duration of each inhale. Lengthen the duration of each exhale. And if it's accessible for you, if your nose is clear, see if you can gently seal your lips. And maybe for the next 3 or 4 breaths, just breathe through your nose. Face is soft. Eyes can be open, eyes can be closed. Pick which one feels a little bit more comfortable for you. And allow yourself to arrive. Give yourself permission to be here. And maybe notice your inner sun. So maybe one more gentle breath here. And then just a tiny little warm up before we start the long held yin posture. So when you're ready, come out of whatever seat you chose and come onto all fours. We'll do a little bit of cat and cow rolling. So come on to hands and knees. Make sure this feels stable. So if hands need to go wider or turn out a bit, or if knees need to be rearranged, then do so. Come to a nice table. And a table pose is where your arms are extended, your spine feels nice and neutral here. And then we'll start into a cat pose. So for cat stretch here, you round and flex your spine up towards the ceiling. Tuck your head, tuck your chin, tuck your tailbone. Maybe stay here in cat for a breath and really reach with the backside of your torso. So you can maybe feel this up in your shoulder blades as they separate from each other. And then as you inhale, sink your belly down towards the floor. Come into a back bend. So now you're arching your spine. Tailbone is trying to point up. And head and neck can look up if that's okay. This is cow. And then maybe continue this now in gentle movement for the next 3 or 4 cycles here. So come back into cat. Slowly move into cow. Take some time to feel how this feels on your spine, maybe up in your shoulders, down in your hips. What does your body feel about this simple vinyasa here? So maybe one more cycle here between both. Maybe you can sync your breath. Maybe a nice exhale into cat, nice inhale into cow. And then back to a nice neutral spine, and we'll set ourselves up for the first yin posture. The first yin posture is an upper back and shoulder opener. It's called quarter dog, and it's a modified version of melting heart or puppy pose. So I'll demonstrate it quickly here just to show you what it looks like. And then I'll give you some alternatives too if you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, yeah, no, not going to happen. So quarter dog, again, you start out on all fours. And if you're familiar with puppy dog poses, it's a modified version of puppy pose here, but it's asymmetric, so we have 2 sides to do. So from hands and knees, you'll start moving your hands forward and extend the left arm forward. Bend the right elbow and bring the right forearm 90 degrees in front of you. And then you'll slowly lower your torso, your head, neck, torso to the ground to rest on the ground. Or you can rest your head and neck on your forearm or on the ground in front of your forearm. Left arm is extending out here to get a stretch through the left side and to create traction in this left shoulder and this left arm. Meanwhile, you're relaxing the muscles in your torso to let your upper torso soften and melt towards the floor here. So this is the pose without any props. This might be problematic. So you might try this and say, okay, yeah, this is a little bit too awkward. Maybe you like just regular old melting heart or puppy pose. That's with both arms forward. So you can put both arms forward. Maybe this, for whatever reason, feels better. So you can always practice just normal melting heart pose. Maybe this is too much for your head, your neck, your shoulders, but you do want to get opener in the upper back. So this is where a blanket and a blanket roll is helpful. You can just do hard opening on a blanket. So get a blanket roll, place it crosswise on your mat, and then just lie on it with your upper back lying on the bolster. So maybe just slightly below the armpits, not too low and not too high so that it's above your neck. And you can do this modification, and you can just stay here for like 8 minutes. We've got 2 sides of quarter dog to do, and so you can just stay here for both of those sides if you want to, which 3 minutes a side plus some counter poses means you get to just kind of marinate here for 8 minutes or so. So you can do this, or you can try quarter dog again. We're in my practices, we're holding postures for about 3 to 3.5 minutes per orientation, and that's what we'll try to do in quarter dog here. So pick your posture. use props as necessary. You can have a pillow underneath your head if you need to. So the first side of quarter dog will be the side with the left arm forward and the right arm with the forearm bent. So again, back body is just stable and lifted to create height so that the spine sags forward here. So lower yourself forward. Left arm is extended to create traction in the left arm, in the upper back. Right arm is bent and comfortable here. So this right arm isn't trying to be strained, it's trying to be comfortable here. And then you decide where you rest your head. It can be on the floor, or it can be on that forearm here. Figure out which one is more accessible for you, and that's the version you choose here. And then this is where we'll stay for a while. Soften the muscles, let the spine and the torso just sag due to gravity here. So we'll remind ourselves of the three principles of a yin practice. The first principle is called find your edge. And this whole discussion of different postures and modifications you can do here is part of finding your edge here. So your edge is a place where your body stops and you start to feel something. So we're getting to a place where we're generating traction and pressure somewhere in the body. We relax the muscle fiber so that traction and pressure can soak into the connective tissue, the joints, the bones, the ligaments, and the fascia here. And if it feels injurious, traumatic, or harmful, that means we've passed our edge and now we're just hurting tissues, which means we need to come out of the posture or find a modification. If we're not feeling anything, we're not going to hurt ourselves, but we might be wasting our time. So this is all part of the process of finding our edge. Once we've found an accessible edge for us, and since we're all unique, our edges will be different. Then we stay for a while. So the second principle is called stillness. Once we've found our edge, then we decide to stay in the posture and not fidget in and out of it. Now, the stillness rule has a lot of exceptions. If you're hurting yourself, if you're feeling injury, that's a red flag to tell you that you need to do something different and come out of the posture. If you're not feeling anything, maybe you move deeper into the posture. If the emphasis of the posture is in the spine or in the shoulders, maybe my head and neck are uncomfortable, I'm free to move my head and neck around, because that's not the intent of the posture. Maybe my feet need to move, maybe my hands need to move. So those are all kind of things to consider during the stillness. And then the third principle is what actually makes yin yin, and that's the principle of time. So it's the time that we spend in the postures here that really does the work. Again, we're trying to spend about 3 minutes in the postures, but not if that creates injury. Maybe 1 or 2 minutes is enough. That said, we've been here for about 3 minutes, so maybe one more breath. And then start engaging the muscles in your arms. Use your hands and your arms to slowly bring yourself back up into table pose. Maybe come all the way back into child's pose. Your version of child's pose. So it can be knees together, or it can be knees wide apart. Maybe big toes touch. Sink your hips back towards your heels. Lower your torso. You can extend your arms forward, but try this. Extend your arms back and let your shoulders droop forward for a moment. That might relieve a lot of the residual pressure that was building up if you were actually doing melting heart pose or quarter dog pose here. So a few moments of this counter pose time to let the shoulders relax, give some relief to the upper back. If you're just laying on the blanket roll and you're nice and comfy there, just stay on the blanket roll here. Otherwise, if you did quarter dog pose, we have the other side of quarter dog pose to do. So when you're ready, come back onto hands and knees. This time, it's the right arm that extends forward. It's the left arm that will be bent. So start walking your hands forward. Right arm extends forward. Bend the left arm, bring the forearm 90 degrees, set it on the floor, and then Find a comfortable position for your head and your neck. Again, pillows here might be handy here. Extend this right arm out so you're creating some traction in the right shoulder and in the upper back. So, this side now. Head can be neutral. You can move head to either side. Find your breath. Soften the muscle fiber so this can sink in to and just become some nice traction in the shoulders. And again, you don't have to stay here for the whole 3 minutes. You stay here for as long as things feel acceptable for you. And then you bring yourself out here. Otherwise, a couple more minutes here. As I alluded to in the introduction, the theme for this class is the summer solstice. So this video is being recorded during the time, the season of the summer solstice, here in the northern hemisphere. Now in the southern hemisphere, it's actually the winter solstice. Here, the summer solstice, it's June, and it's the longest daylight hours of the year. And it's the day where the sun reaches the highest point in the sky when it crosses the meridian as it goes from east to west here. In the southern hemisphere, the opposite is happening. It's the winter solstice. It's the day with the shortest period of daylight hours. And the sun is at this lowest point in the sky as it crosses the north-south meridian line here. But these solstices mark important dates on our calendars. It's reminding us of the year and the seasons that are moving by. And so the solstices have been celebrated throughout antiquity, throughout all of humanity, as these important calendar markers. We live in a technological modern world, and so we don't really need to know anything about the solstices because we have wall calendars, we have watches, we have smartphones to tell us what the day and the time is. Well, back when none of these things existed, you told time by watching the sky, and you learned the cycles of the year. In other words, the cycles of the earth as it passes around the sun by noting these important dates, the solstices and the equinox. We have about 5 more breaths here on this side of quarter dog pose, if that's okay. If this is getting a little bit too intense, then you give yourself permission to come out here. So the solstices, the equinoxes, this tracking of seasons is actually caused to the fact that as the earth travels around the sun in its orbit, its rotational axis is tilted. So it's tilted by 23.5 degrees. So at the summer solstice, the rotational pole, the north pole of the earth, is leaning towards the sun, and the south pole is leaning away from it. In December, when it's the winter solstice, the north pole is leaning away from the sun, the south pole is leaning towards it, and therefore it's the summer solstice in the southern hemisphere. One more breath here. And then when you're ready, activate your hands and your arms. Slowly bring yourself up and out. So you have some choices here. You can go back into wide-legged child's pose again, if you like that as a counter pose. Or if your shoulders are really sore, then maybe just come up to a comfortable seat of your choice. Roll your shoulders a few times. So maybe roll them forward, up and back. A couple times, roll them back, up and forward. Just some gentle movement to release that pressure. And then from here, we'll begin to set up for the next yin posture. The next yin posture is called twisted roots, which is a spinal twist. And you'll slowly make your way onto your back. When you get there, knees are bent, feet are on the floor, and then take your left leg Bring your left leg in towards your torso. And then wrap your left thigh on top of your right thigh. So this is the twisted root legs here. And we're going to twist the knees over to the right. So it might be helpful if you move your hips over to the left a little bit, just to make it easier to stack them. Then maybe draw both the left and the right knee into your torso, and then slowly lower both the left and right knee over to the right, stacking the left hip on top of the right hip here. This is supposed to be a spinal twist, so if you ended up on your side like this, then your spine is not in a twist. So you want to melt your upper body back towards the left so that your spine is in a twist here. This left shoulder may or may not make it back to the floor. It's okay as long as it's not in pain. So if it's just floating and it feels okay, it can just float. If it's floating and it doesn't feel okay, you start maybe grabbing props here. Same thing with your knees. If your knees are floating here, they feel okay, they can float. Sometimes your knees will make it to the ground. If they're on the ground, they're fine too. If they're floating and that doesn't feel very good, then you want to put a prop underneath your legs so that they feel some support here. So we're going to stay here for a while. So again, this is the next 3-minute posture here. And we'll stay here a couple more minutes or so. If it's okay with your neck and your head and you want a complete twist, you can turn your head and your neck towards the left and you can extend this left arm up to the left. Only if that feels good. If this creates too much strain in your neck, keep your head and neck neutral. And if there's too much strain in your hips, if you're really wanting to just do the spinal twist, you can always undo the twisted root legs. Otherwise, you can keep them twisted and you get the gentle hip opener as a little bit of an extra benefit here. And then once you've settled into this twist, then you just stay. Notice your breath. Soften your muscles. Notice your physical sensations, but notice your mental, emotional qualities here. And if they're not harmful, they might be awkward and uncomfortable, but if they're not harmful, then see if you can just let them sit here. And we're about halfway through this side of Twisted Roots. So as the Earth revolves around the Sun in its yearly orbit, the Sun appears to move through various constellations or background stars. So throughout the year, the Sun appears to have certain stars in its background. If we could see those stars, we can't really see them because the Sun is too bright, but we know they're there because when the Sun is not in that area of the sky, we can see the stars. And so the ancients devised this scheme to keep track of time by watching what constellations and what stars the Sun resided in during different times of the year. And they were particularly interested in what parts of the sky the Sun seemed to reside in during the equinoxes and during the solstices, the winter solstice and the summer solstice. And so traditionally, we've noticed that the Sun seems to reside in the zodiac constellation known as Gemini. Gemini the twist, that's to us Westerners what we call that configuration of stars. And so we say during the summer solstice, the Sun is in Gemini. That's actually not technically true anymore. So due to the precession of the Earth axis, the precession of the equinoxes, the Sun actually is in the constellation Taurus these days. It's no longer in Gemini. Now this is a very slow and subtle effect. So just a couple more breaths here. It takes 26,000 years for the Earth to make one wobble, one precession orbit. But it does make the Sun appear to move into constellations during the summer solstice different constellations during this slow 26,000 year cycle. And so over the last few hundred years, it's moved out of Gemini and into Taurus. Even though it's still closer to the bright stars in Gemini, we can come out of this spinal twist. So when you're ready, bring yourself back to neutral. Maybe use the inhale to bring your knees back up to center. Uncross your legs. And then for a moment, a little bit of counter maneuver to work out the kinks. So you can hug your knees into your chest. You can do waterfall pose, maybe point and flex the feet. You can do reclined windshield wipers. Any kind of organic movement that feels kind of good to you. We have the other side of twisted roots to do. So when you're ready, we'll just get set up for the other side. Maybe find your center line again. Knees bent, feet are on the floor, hip width apart. And now it's the other knee, so it's wrap the right thigh on top of the left thigh, make the twisted root. By the way, you can always just skip the twisted roots and do the spinal twist with legs parallel. Maybe shift the hips over a little bit if that's helpful, and then lower the knees gently over to the left. And since we're wanting a spinal twist, upper torso melts back to the right. You can extend the right arm out in an outrigger position here. Head can stay neutral if that's better for the neck, or you can look right to create a complete spinal twist throughout the torso here. And then we'll stay here. A few minutes on this side of twisted roots here. So as the Earth orbits the Sun, the Earth's axis on a yearly basis doesn't really change that much. It kind of points in the same direction. Right now, the North Pole of the Earth is pointing towards the North Star, towards Polaris. But the whole axis slowly wobbles every 26,000 years. So it's too slow of a wobble for a particular person to notice, but if you're carefully watching and observing the sky, which our ancestors did over antiquity, you notice that there's this procession. Now, they didn't know that the Earth was wobbling. All they knew was that the place the Sun resided in, with respect to the background stars, on the days of the solstices and the equinox changed slowly over thousands of years, and we're noticing that now. So probably if you ask somebody, what constellation is the Sun in during the summer solstice, they're going to say Gemini. But actually, it's no longer Gemini, it's actually Taurus, because of precession of the equinoxes. We've noticed this effect more because of two major features on the mapping of our globe. So if you look at a globe of the Earth and it has latitude and longitude lines on it, there's these two lines on there that you'll always notice on either side of the equator. One of them is called the Tropic of Cancer, which is above the equator, and the Tropic of Capricorn, which is below the equator. Now it turns out many millennia, many thousands of years ago, the Sun was in the constellation Cancer on the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere. And when it was in Cancer, the Crab constellation, then on the summer solstice, right on that latitude line that you see marked on Earth globes, at noon, at local noon, the Sun would be directly overhead. It would be at zenith there on that line on the summer solstice, back when the Sun actually was in the constellation Cancer. And alternatively, it's the summer solstice in the southern hemisphere, which is the winter solstice up here. A few thousand years ago, the Sun would have been directly overhead at zenith in the constellation Capricorn here. But of course, the Sun no longer resides in those constellations on the winter solstice or the summer solstice. So a couple more breaths here on this side. Maybe on your next inhale, use the inhale to bring your knees back up to center. And then when you get back to center here, just take a little time to work out the kinks of that deep twist. Maybe it was pretty deep for the hip openers here. Maybe reclined windshield wipers feels pretty good. So for that, bring your feet wide apart, like right foot finds the right edge of the yoga mat, left foot finds the left edge of the yoga mat. The rest of your torso is nice and neutral and comfortable here. And then you just lower both knees over to one side. Maybe pause for a moment, bring them back up to center, lower them over to the other side, pause for a moment. And then bring them back up to center, do this a couple more times. And then at some point, bring them back up. Rest here in stillness for a couple of breaths before we move on. And when you're feeling ready, you can bring your feet in. You can roll over to one side, gently bring yourself up to seated. And get set and ready for the next yin posture, which is caterpillar pose. Caterpillar pose is just forward fold, legs extended out in front. So if you have a lot of stiffness in your legs and your back body, you might want to sit up on a little bit or a lot of height. So you might actually want to sit up on some blocks, some pretty good height, or maybe just a blanket or two will be enough. Legs are extended out in front. They can be straight if they can be straight without pain, but they can also be bent. And sometimes if you have a blanket roll, you can even place some sort of prop underneath your knees so that they can stay bent, so they can stay out of pain here. And then you'll roll yourself up tall and then begin this pose by hinging forward from your hip sockets. So your pelvic bone wants to move up and forward as much as it can until it stops. Once it's stopped, then it's stopped, and then the rest of your torso softens, relaxes, and melts forward as far forward as it goes. Now you can just hang here if this is accessible for you. If not, then you can always gather up some props to create some support underneath your torso, and then find something that just works for you. Again, you can use as many or as little props as you want to in these postures. In this example, I'm using quite a few, but I'm still feeling the traction that's running along the backs of my legs and through the back of my torso as I just hang out here. You can just hang in midair if you want to, or maybe you have the range of motion where your torso actually touches your legs here. So about 3 minutes here or so. So these seasonal dates, very important for our ancestors to keep track of time. Remember, they didn't have modern technology to keep track of the passage of a year. They had to watch the sky. And so things like the equinoxes, the solstices, very important to them. We know this because they built these great monuments to the summer solstice and to the winter solstice, the most famous of which is, of course, probably Stonehenge in England, a big monolith of stone that was built thousands of years ago, aligned to different astronomical alignments, but most importantly maybe was the summer solstice here and the winter solstice. And you can find these markers on ancient buildings and ancient places all over the world because everyone was interested in when did the solstices happen, when did the equinox happen. And they created great ceremony and ritual around these to help remind everybody of these important calendrical dates, because particularly if you were a farmer, you needed to know when to plant crops, when the harvest would be ready. So again, solstice is incredibly important. Now we have about another 1.5 minutes here in this posture. Decide if you're okay where you're at, or if you need to come out, or if you can sink a little bit deeper. Maybe Maybe if you're supported by props, you can take some of your props away here. Cultures all over, the Egyptian cultures, the Native American cultures here in North America. So you find different things in Chaco Canyon, home of the ancestral Chacoan people. And I talked a little bit about Fajada Butte, which had a spiral on it that marked the passage of the equinoxes and of the solstices. Indeed, other Native American tribes and civilizations, the great nomadic plains tribes of the northern Great Plains, like the Cheyenne, the Crow, the Kiowa, and the Sioux, also marked the summer solstice as a very important date. In fact, in their theology, in the Great Plains tribe theology, they often associated specific places with specific areas of the sky, i.e., certain constellations and stars were actually signified by actual places, real places on the ground to them. And they had a special place for the place that the sun resided in at the summer solstice. So just one more breath here. And then when you're feeling ready, use your hands and your arms to slowly bring yourself up. Slowly here. This is not a fast practice. When you get up, if you feel a lot of reverberation, maybe grow your spine nice and long. You can even reach your sternum up towards the ceiling in a slight back bend here. You also can do things like gentle twists to work out any stagnation. Maybe your legs need to be bobbed around a little bit because you're feeling a lot of residual strain from that. We can try a core engaging counter pose known as the hinge maneuver. So if you want to try that, you slowly clear your mat, make your way down onto your back, bend your knees, and then extend your legs up towards the ceiling in a waterfall pose. Arms are extended on either side of your torso, palms face down. Head, neck, shoulders, torso are comfortable. And then over the next 2 or 3 breaths, see if you can slowly lower your extended legs to the ground. Your core will have to be engaged here to do this. So this is a yang maneuver. And then at some point, heels touch down here. And then we'll get ready for the next yin posture. The next yin posture, the common name for this posture is happy baby pose. So this is a hip opener. And you can try different variations for this posture here. Again, we'll try to hold it for we'll do this for yin time. So holding happy baby pose for about 3 minutes can sometimes get pretty intense. So first version of happy baby pose is while you're lying on your back, just bend your knees, draw your knees into your chest. You can hug your knees into your chest by either clasping your hands behind your thighs like this, or in front of your shins like this. And maybe this is intense enough that you stay here. Or you can start to draw your knees wide apart and towards your armpits here. So this is kind of the second version of happy baby. Maybe this is enough. So you're just going to try to stay here and you can feel the pressure here. Otherwise, the next stage is weave your arms on the insides of your legs. Find your shins and then point the bottoms of your feet up to the ceiling, and then maybe just hold on to your shins with your hands. Or if you have the access, maybe you can actually grab your feet. If you can grab your feet with your hands, then use your hands and your arms to gently pull your feet, your shins, your knees slowly down towards the ground or as far as they go. So this is about as far as they go for me. So this is my happy baby pose. And then you just stay here for as long as you can stand it. I'll set the stopwatch for about 3 minutes here. So again, take some time to just notice your breath. Notice your holistic sensation in your yin postures here. Notice if things are too intense and desperate, or if they're acceptable, maybe they're slightly uncomfortable. This is where you say, come back to the three principles of yin here. So during the summer solstice of the Great Plains, the Native American tribes that lived there, particularly the Sioux, knew that the sun resided in the traditional constellation that we know as Gemini. However, they did not know it as Gemini. They had another name for it. They called the constellation the Bear's Lodge. And to them, it represented a real place on the ground where they were all to meet for great ceremony and ritual. And the place that the Bear Lodge constellation represented is a place that they also called the Bear's Lodge on the ground. They also called it the Gray Horn Butte, was their name for it, although the rest of us have a different name for that place. And the name that we give it is Devil's Tower in Wyoming. And it was there at Devil's Tower during the summer solstice, when the sun was in the Bear's Lodge constellation, that the great tribes, the Sioux and the Cheyenne, they would all meet and hold council there. And they would have this great celebration that they would know, that was known as the Sundance, where their younger warriors would actually go through these very aesthetic rituals of dancing for several days to promote a sense of community and of healing and of understanding, until they basically collapsed of exhaustion here. It's interesting that we all kind of have our summer solstice rituals in the yoga world, in the Western posture practice world. Folks like to come together during the summer solstice and try to practice sun salutations. In fact, one of the things people like to do is they see if they can do 108 sun salutations on a solstice or on an equinox. So that's kind of the yoga community's version of the Sundance. Although this is a yin class, so I'm not doing many sun salutations here, but if you're unfamiliar with what a sun salutation is, then all you need to do is type in sun salutation in the search bar of the YouTube webpage, and you'll come up with literally tens of thousands of videos of people demonstrating their versions of a sun salutation here. We just have a couple more breaths to go here in happy baby pose. So maybe a little bit of yang in the arms, maybe one more pressing the feet down towards the floor. And then go ahead and release the feet. Slowly bring the knees back together. And maybe a little bit of wiggling around is warranted to work out the pressures that we're building in the hips and in the legs during that hip opener here. And then from here, we'll do one more twist. Something similar to twisted roots. So bend both knees, bring both knees into your chest, and instead of twisting them, just lower both knees over to the right side, left shoulder melts over to the left, in just a short spinal twist. So we're not holding this for yin time, just a couple of breaths here. And then bring your knees back up to center, go over to the other side. Pause here for 1 or 2 or maybe 3 breaths or so. And then on your next inhale, bring them back up to center. Give your knees a final hug, maybe any kind of ending motions that you would like to work out kinks. And then give yourself permission to come into your resting pose for the next several minutes here. It can be traditional Shavasana, which is just lying on your back, arms and legs extended. Maybe this is not comfortable today, so find a different resting pose. Maybe it's reclined butterfly, maybe it's legs up the wall. Maybe it's a nice, quiet, seated, meditative position here. Whatever you find, maybe take some time to move around. If something feels a little bit kinked or out of line, then move it. Give yourself permission to move it, wiggle it around. And then take some time to notice that connection that your body is making with the floor, and establish a sense of rootedness. Soften your face, release your jaw. Eyes can be opened, they can be closed. Your eye sockets are relaxed. That space in between your eyes, let it be soft. Jaw is released, tongue is relaxed. So maybe you have to move your face around a little bit to let it soften here. We hold a lot of tension in our heads and our face because that's where our brain is, and our brain tends to be over busy. Give it permission to not be over busy. In other words, postpone being a human doing. Give yourself permission to be a human being. The only thing that has to happen right now is that you're breathing and existing, and you're noticing your own being. In fact, visualize yourself as just completing a Sundance that you have been performing all day long, your special version of the Sundance. You're exhausted, you're depleted, and now it is time for long-deserved rest. So you lay yourself down on the quiet, soft earth. The sun is setting, the birds are settling in, the sky is growing dark, and the world is growing quiet along with you. And now this is your chance for a few moments of peace, where you can just thank yourself and be grateful for all the effort of your own Sundance. At some point, begin to deepen your breath, and slowly begin to bring motion back into fingers and into toes. And then you'll expand that motion into hands and into feet, maybe arms, legs. You can maybe gently move your head around slightly. Bring back some gentle motion into your being. And then when you feel ready, softly, gently bend your knees. Roll over to one side. And when you get there, stay there long enough. Stay there long enough to cultivate a deep sense of gratitude for your practice and your efforts, but also a deep sense of gratitude for you, your unique manifestation in the universe. The universe, the sun, are ecstatically joyful that you are here. And then when you're ready, gently bring yourself up into a comfortable seat. Once there, find a little bit of stability here. Maybe grow your spine nice and neutral. Bring your hands together at heart center. I'll end practice with an Om. You can either join in or just listen. The inner sunlight in me honors the inner sunlight in you. Namaste.